Right, we're finally looking at the John Deere, and this thing is not done by any means, but I figured I am here at my shop that I work at, Conquer Custom Rods, and I have the privilege of putting this thing up on a hoist, so what not a better time to show you guys what we did to get this John Deere to act and look like it does. This thing started out its life as a John Deere 60, and it still is for the most part, but a lot of things have changed to make it into an off-road mower. And we're going to get into those things right about now. John Deere did a great thing back in the day by making these mowers so small and so awesome. These things are heavy duty for their size, and that is because, well, this transaxle. This is a miniature Peerless 1200 transaxle, which means it is a 3-speed transaxle with, yes, 1-inch axle shafts, the shafts we always talk about. Now, not only with this transaxle did it give us a good starting point for a rear diff, it also gave us a great opportunity for hydraulic handbrakes. I'm gonna pop this tire off and show you guys exactly how we did that. The downside to having such a small lawnmower is that the overall width from side to side is usually pretty narrow. So what we ended up doing is putting on, I had to make these custom 5-bolt hub adapters. Now these originally came off of a Craftsman Hydro. It's like a GT5000 Hydro version. And they're usually a little bit different than this. Usually the outside here sits in the middle about here. So I had to lathe it off and then put it out here, and we did a bunch of custom work, but we did that so that we can move the tire from the center here outwards. And then along with that, we put on Jeep wheel spacers. These end up being 2-inch Jeep wheel spacers. As you guys can see there, they are 5 on 4.5, and that is like a lot of bolt patterns for a lot of different things. But it is the bolt pattern that we have for the lawnmower, so it works out great. Alright, so with the tire knocked off, we can have a closer look at this brake setup. So, what did we use? We used a Geo Pit Bike or Pit Quad front brake caliper and hydraulic reservoir. Now, the caliper itself is pretty simple. It has 2 mounts, and when you get the kit for it, it's going to come with a bracket. Now, usually the bracket that comes with doesn't work for our application, so we have to build our own custom bracket. This one's nothing crazy, but it works great. Alright, so this thing is very, very tight in there. It's about 3/16 of a gap from the actual disc to the frame, and that's all you need. Clearance is clearance, as they say. Now, this thing came with a strap brake, so I ended up using the hub that it came with and lathing that down and lathing out my custom owned flat disc brake so that I could have this custom brake setup. This brake setup works so damn well, and we use it on all of our mowers that we care about. Now, along with the brake setup, you have the hydraulic hose that runs up to the reservoir and then the actual handle. So you push that, in turn it pushes the 2 brake pads up against the disc, and wow, does that ever work good. This mower we run a lock E-clip, and as you guys can see there, it sits right on the end of the axle shaft in a groove. Now, the problem that we are having, and you might notice that I have a bolt here, this bolt actually runs straight into the axle shaft and then gets locked in, and that's because the keyway had a bit of too much play, so that locks it in so that the keyway holds it from spinning on the axle shaft, so does that, but that locks it in so that no area has play. Now that's just axle shaft play from side to side, because this isn't one continuous axle shaft, it is 2 axle shafts. Alright, I'm getting into too much there, but anyways, let's get into the front end of this thing. It is also awesome. Alright, so the front end of this thing is completely custom as well, and that starts at the front axle. Now, the front axle we actually took from a different lawnmower because it was the same style, as it's just a flat bar. It's about 5/8 thick, and it's bent, but the other one, the original factory axle, was just straight, and actually it was tucked further back in the frame. So if that makes sense, so if the front axle was here now, it was actually sat back. So we extended it out to, just again, we like to always add width and length to our mowers, but not too much because it gets stupid, but be smart about it. Anyway, so when we did that, we built all custom new front axle brackets and bearing spots and bushings and stuff so that the front axle will articulate all nice. As you guys can also see, we added some front shocks on this thing. If you're wondering what they're from, they're actually from a 1928 Model A. They're not factory shocks, but they were upgraded at some point. I don't even know, back in the 80s, 90s, or early 2000s, but they worked out great. I ended up doing some exhaust on this car and some suspension work, and these worked out perfectly. So, along with the front axle, we always upgrade our spindles, and that is just simply by reinforcing them so that they don't bend. Now along in the front axle here as well, we also upgrade our tie rod setups. As you guys can see, this one here is pretty messed up, so we actually ended up bending this a little bit ago, so I just cut it and extended with some Ready Rod. But so now that I know that the setup works, I can take these out. I can buy all new ends for them because these ones are pretty worn out. They got some play and whatnot, and they're just, well, as you guys can see, I had to replace this one with a Heim joint, and it's all pushed out. So it's time just to replace these with some nice upgraded ones. Big thing we do to our front axles too here is add steering stops so that your steering can't steer further than it needs to, because stuff will bend and stuff will break. You can see when the tires are turned fully to the left, it hits the lock there, and then when you steer fully to the right, it hits the lock there. Along with that, it also hits up here so that the steering, you can't actually oversteer it with your hand on the steering wheel. And those are all just things that really help out so that you don't bend and break stuff while you're out on the mower. Now, while we're down here, I took apart everything here and cleaned it, re-greased it, laid out bushings for it so that it got rid of all the play. Because any play in any bit of steering adds up to a lot of play in the end. This motor is a 14 horsepower Kawasaki. Now this came out of a John Deere and actually worked itself into Magnum the mower, and it worked out great. But Magnum upgraded to a bigger engine, so this engine was up for sale, and well, I got it for free because, well, that's what you get when you're buddies with the guy who owns it. Now, this engine has a little bit of work done to it, nothing internally on the engine side of things, but we put a 26mm slide carburetor on this thing, and that woke up this motor so much. We ended up adding this custom intake filter here just to keep any mud from your tires flinging up getting into the filter, and it actually works pretty damn great. This one we ran a gravity feed setup. I actually need to swap this filter in this round. I was just I don't even know, let's just say I was drunk and I ended up putting these in the wrong spot, because when you have it like this orientation, the filter just drains through your carbon and will leak out. But if you have it where the shutoff's before or after your filter there, then it won't leak. Anyways, too drunk, gotta fix that. Anyways, this is a 12 volt system and the charging loop is in the motor, and it works great. Now, we love to run these kind of style gas pedals, and with this style you usually end up having to run 2 springs, one on the actual carburetor and then one on the foot throttle, and that just makes it so that you have lots of spring right back to return so that it won't over rev. Now the other thing we like to do is see how that little bit of play, that's not actually pulling the cable, because when you're driving down the road, these things don't have suspension, so your foot's just sitting there going like that. So when it's doing that, it's not actually revving it all erratically. It's not until you actually get into there that you start revving. So little quick thing to do when you're setting up your throttle. Now this one was super simple because we just ended up using the slide carburetor setup, so we didn't have to make anything custom or do anything too hard. Along with that, we had to make a custom exhaust. This isn't the final exhaust, but it works out great. It's just a simple 1-inch tube down to 1 1/4 inches or 1 1/8 and then out to a blast pipe. This has some internal baffling in it that I use. This used to be actually Musty's exhaust. Alright, so underneath this thing is pretty far simple, other than the fact that we run 1 constant belt and 1 clutching belt, which means that we have 1 belt that runs off the engine back to a jack shaft here, and then off the jack shaft we have a belt that runs back, and I'll see if I can get in here. As you guys can see, the jack shaft, so this is the engine pulley and this is constant. It never takes a clutching instance, so it never loosens up is what I'm trying to say. This one in the back here drives off of the jack shaft down back to your transaxle, and that one in turn, when you clutch, that one loosens up. So this setup works out great, and I do really like these setups, so you don't have to have your engine belt actually rotate and twist over and have to clutch that while it's doing that, and it just doesn't work. Anyways, there's a lot going on these mowers, and if you want to see a lot more information about these things, check out the actual build series, and you really like them. Another thing we do run on all of our lawnmowers is off-road LED headlights and rock lights. This one doesn't have the rock lights yet, but it definitely has the headlights, and they are bright. These come from Vivid Lumen Industries, and man, do they have a great selection of off-road lights. Not only for your lawnmowers, but for everything else, like your ATVs, your quads, your side-by-sides, your trucks, your cars, they got it all. I hope you guys liked our little JB60. I'm really falling in love with this thing. We still have so much more work to do this thing, upgrading different things. Like I said, the steering can get all redone with the new setups, with the new ball joint ends, new DOM tubing. We can get new tires on this thing. As you guys can see, it looks really great with the tires that it has, but I'd like to get some 22 to 23 inch rear tires opposed to what it has now is 18 some rear. So some bigger tires on the back will make a huge difference, especially for that ground clearance on the Trans Am. So not only that, but it will be, as you guys might see in the videos of this thing, it's not terribly fast. And that's because I built this mower for my girlfriend and other friends of ours to actually just get out and try a mower's experience. Try an off-road mower, see how it works, and then actually have a good mower with good brakes. A little bit of a pulley swap. It does still go not bad. I'd say 20 kilometers an hour, which can be scary on a mower. Not as scary as some of our other ones that can do anywhere from 50 to, we have a mower now that can do like 70 plus kilometers now. And that's still, like, I know other guys can do way more than that, but for what we're doing, that's pretty fast for us. We like crawling and just getting to the trails at a good speed, a good rate of speed. So anyways, I really dig in this mower, and it's going to be around for a long time. So I hope you guys like it, and maybe one day one of you guys can actually come out and ride this and experience the mower thrill and the adventures that we go on, maybe a mower riding trip or something like that. Anyways, we'll catch you guys in the next video. Hope you guys liked it. Woo!